So I'd like to invite Julian Edelstein to join me. And she has a copy of the book, which couldn't be sort of fresher off the press. I have yet to see the physical book myself, so maybe we can pass that around to the audience so that you can look through the book as we are speaking. So please join me in welcoming Julian.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
So to introduce you very briefly, Julian is born in Cape Town but has been based in London since 1985 and has a long career as a press photographer, working for media outlets all around the world and exhibiting all around the world. The book that we are here to discuss, though, is entitled Here and There, An Expedition of Sorts, published by Ghost Books. And it was, the book, it basically covers your entire career and more. It kind of intertwines a very personal family story with the work that you have produced, throughout your professional career. So there's a really unusual kind of idea for a publication. So how did you come up with this idea, and how did you convince a publisher to actually go through with it?
So it does encapsulate a lot of my work. I need to say that I probably earn my living a lot with portrait and documentary, so wearing kind of two hats. But in 2002, I finished working on my 5-year project about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission related to South Africa. And when that was finished, I started working. It was almost like I was being called by my ancestors, and I started working on a project related to the Sangoma, who are the traditional healers. But at the same time, I also discovered there was a whole missing branch of the family. And really weirdly, it was my grandfather and his 2 brothers had they were about to be drafted. There were pogroms happening in Latvia, and they went south to Africa. But they left their sister, and she was, one day, a Russian army general came into the village and said, "You've got 24 hours to leave, otherwise you're taken into those woods and shot dead." So the fascinating thing is I decided to go back and visit Latvia, but the irony was I'd been invited by a Palestinian group to go to the West Bank. So I went from the West Bank, which reminded me of apartheid, the separate development. I'm trying to give you how it just covers a crazy amount of ground. And Latvia then drew me to finding this. I discovered that the family had ended this sister, Minna, who'd been kicked out of Latvia, had ended up having to find a new home, 24 hours to leave her home, and found it in Ukraine, bizarrely. So I ended up having to go to Ukraine as well. And, of course, I also covered the refugee crisis, Lesbos, Calais, Lampedusa, Linosa, and saw all these people coming in to beaches from Turkey, from Tunisia, probably also with 24 hours to decide what will you take. And so I hope I've answered that question.
Absolutely. I think the book opens with a more than 50-page section, which is a family history. That is. We've seen some images of this already that combines your account of the family history with a lot of documents, family albums, letters, all of these elements. So how did you kind of go about piecing all of that together?
What's really strange is that I was crowdfunding the book, and the more time it took, the more it actually benefited from it. And the story, I was doing a writing course as well, and bizarrely, the story ended up having a beginning, a middle, an arc, and an end. And so that I had to write the story. It was very clear. It was a very powerful story, and it brought in early work as well, related to South Africa. My very first story was about a fishing community where they had to allow the fishermen to stay in the white area because they didn't have the infrastructure. It was too expensive to get the sea guys in who needed to get the fish at the crack of dawn. So it was the only mixed race community in the whole of South Africa living together. So this book somehow, I think it does hang together as a story. It is literally a beginning, a middle, and end, and ends literally with me communicating with my relative in Dnipro when the war begins on Telegram, you know, the encrypted, where he says, do not come, it's too dangerous, come when we win the war. We played music before the war, and we'll play music when the war ends. And the extraordinary thing was, I also then discovered the story began with finding a picture of my great aunts who were in the first female ladies band in Southern Africa. And then I sort of looked, and the descendants in Dnipro, he's the local rock star. So you know, you look at generations and how these stories continue.
And so, as you've already mentioned, you know, after this kind of family history, the book chronologically goes through over 2 decades of work in a single book. And, you know, in so many different places, and obviously in each case, you're having to kind of condense, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of images into a handful of images. So how did you kind of go about that process of deciding what to include in the book?
With great difficulty, and there are many unpublished darlings. And I worked with Stu Smith of Gost, and he was quite tough sometimes, but he's it's very good. You get unobjective about your images, of course, and as you're saying, they had to really be condensed, and often it was, the work that was shot either on large format or medium format, and the stories that accompanied, that made it, that encapsulated the story and made it as rich as possible. That's his grandmother and my grandfather were brothers and sister. So it was a fascinating journey, and tells the story of today, really, I think, of...
I think that is another really striking aspect of the book, is that we are so used to seeing these kinds of images with a kind of, dry, objective, journalistic caption that accompanies them, X thousand people, this happened. And what carries through the book is this word that you keep using of story, and of your personal, telling of this story. And so I think that's a really interesting kind of thread that runs throughout the book, from your, personal family history to the way that we are led to engage with these photographs of current events.
I just wanted the last image you saw was I got on the boat that had been crashed in Linosa, and what it was the guys the smugglers often put people into boats, as you all know, and this was quite a big boat, and we found the water-drenched directions on how to drive the boat, and it had crashed into the rocks, and so there were the instructions from Sfax, and it was later that, lots of people, as we know, have not made it.
You already touched on this, but obviously it's very striking, the locations that there are in the book. Ukraine, the West Bank. You know, these are the stories that are, you know, that are monopolizing all of the media right now. And so,
Yeah.
how, I mean, what is your feeling, you know, today, looking at that, looking at all the work that you've done over these years in view of the current context?
I'm fairly astonished, actually. I mean, honestly, it's been a very long journey to get the book published. The fact that you know, the Gaza has happened, that you know, that the Israel-Gaza drama, the West Bank, that Ukraine is, for me, I mean, who would even, how could I even have dreamt that they would kind of coagulate? It's been, to me, it's a real sense of amazement. And to have touched upon them really powerfully. I feel, and I was saying to Katie, who helped edit when I was doing because the narrative is so powerful and it's so important, I should say, in the book. But I got the book and I could barely open it, and I was really nervous about what I'd written now, given the Gaza events, that I'd written enough about being in the West Bank, and there is it's me saying, you know, what was really difficult was being in the West Bank and seeing cars have to give way for settler traffic. And when I came back, I said that every single person should be forced to go through a checkpoint, because it was more visceral and powerful and strong and appalling an experience for me than I remember. And I, you know, apartheid, you know, was in townships and doing truth and reconciliation for 5 years, and victims and perpetrators, those stories for Truth and Lies. You know, I feel I thought I'd seen it all.
I had said to Julian beforehand that it's almost impossible to talk about this book in 15 minutes, given the scope of it all, but we've already been through 15 minutes, unfortunately, so we have just enough time for a question from the audience, if someone has a question for Julian.
Nobody.
Thank you for this epic work. It's beautiful. And obviously there's so many questions one could ask about that, so I'm just going to ask something really simple. But I'm just curious, looking at this person that has gone out and searched for so many stories, where did this impulse come from? Where did this impulse to take pictures and to be curious in the way that you are? Like, where did that start? What was the beginning, would you say?
So, in the book, I think I try and explain it. And I think my very first experience, or my first, I remember being in South Africa, we had nannies, black, white, and I remember I was very close to my nanny, and I remember my very, very first experience, the terror and the fear as the police came to find what they called the dom pass. And if you translate dom pass, it means a pass for dumb people. It virtually is that. And they'd come searching to see if our servant had a pass to be there. And I remember this terror and fear, and my parents hiding. Her name was Gertie. And that was very, very powerful. But also, somebody sent me a photograph, and it's a children's birthday party, and I count that there are 15 people in this photograph, and they are servants like they were in, you know, white mischief in Kenya. You know, everybody was looking at something, either a present being opened or something in that direction, and I'm the only person looking at the photographer. And I was very aware there was a woman photographer operating in that time. I mean, I was 5 years old, but it must have made me think I was fascinated. So it's a mix of also that dehumanizing other people that made me, I think, and my mother always used to say, look.
Thank you so much, Julian.
Thank you.